Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, disobedience, discipline, despair, and deliverance, by the hand of a man named Samson, a conflicted man. And Jesus heals a man born blind, physically and spiritually. Today on 3-in-1, as we consider Judges chapters 13 through 15 and John chapter 9. Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Now, there was a certain man from Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Indeed now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines." Chapter 13 begins with an interesting interaction between Manoah, his wife, and the angel of the Lord. God sovereignly chose to use the life of their son before he was even born, before he was even conceived. So in verse 24 it says, "The woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him." And Samson's life started out great, and it ended with God being gracious. But it was in between. It was that dash on the tombstone, in between birth and death, where this inwardly conflicted man was mightily sinful, and yet mightily used of God. Now remember, we have this nasty thing called free will that can get in the way when it comes to cooperating with God. God can place his hand on anyone, but once he does that, we can still choose to run away or run our own way or fill ourselves with the things of the world. So Samson is mostly an illustration of what not to do. His life is an illustration of wasted potential. Samson started out so well, God-fearing parents, an announcement from the angel of the Lord, but maybe all of that went to his head. Because we see from the get-go, as he starts to grow, he seems just like a spoiled teenage brat, ordering his parents around. Chapter 14 starts out this way. "Now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, 'I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore go and get her for me as a wife.' And his father and his mother say to him, 'Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all of my people that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?' And Samson said to his father, 'Get her for me, for she pleases me well.'" Sounds just like a man. But oh man, I would be a horrible youth pastor. I have no patience for that type of attitude. But I sure am thankful that God does. I'm sure I'm thankful that God can use annoying teenage punks, because that's what I was when I got saved. And there's still a lot of that rebellious punk still left in there, I'm afraid. See, God isn't riled up by this guy's selfish attitude. He's already working behind the scenes to use this man to deliver his people from the hands of the Philistines. And today is training day. Now, let's see. What shall we use to train this young man on how to fight? Oh, I know. How about a lion? Verse 4, "But his mother and father did not know that it was the Lord, and that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now, to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hands. But he did not tell his father nor his mother about what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well, and after some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. And he took some of it in his hands and went along eating. And when he came to his father and his mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion." Now, what's even more odd about this interaction is it seems like it didn't even surprise him at all that he tore apart a lion with his own hands. So I wonder if he's been dealing with this supernatural strength for some time now. And this may account for his his attitude, or at least add to his attitude. Samson, a man sovereignly, graciously, mercifully used by God, and at the same time selfish, extremely selfish, with an attitude, with an insatiable appetite for sin. Now, the life of Samson will include a series of situations where his attitude and his appetite, especially for women, will stir up a lot of trouble, probably the worst of which we'll read about tomorrow in chapter 16. Now, as we transition to our New Testament reading in John chapter 9, we join Jesus as he interacts with a man born blind. It all begins with a question from his disciples. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? See, there was this cultural assumption that sin was the cause of all sickness. But Jesus refutes this cultural, unbiblical assumption by answering, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind men with the clay. And he said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. I love this. Jesus didn't just discuss the blind beggar's pitiful condition. He actually did something about it. See, the disciples wanted to be professors with professional distance, talking about this blind beggar right in front of him as though he were deaf, not blind. But Jesus instead rolls up his sleeves and literally gets his hands dirty in his desire to help this man. 1 John 1:18 in the Amplified says, little children, let us not love merely in theory or in speech, but in deed and in truth, in practice and in sincerity. In the Children's Bible it says this, dear children, don't just talk about love. Put your love into action. Then it will truly be love. Now, it may not seem all that loving to you and I for Jesus to spit in the dirt and rub mud in this man's blind eyes and then send him bumbling and stumbling to the pool of Siloam. But you'll notice in verse 6 that it says, he anointed the eyes of the blind man. Believe it or not, in Jesus' day, the medicinal properties of saliva were held in high regard. One commentator says, the use of spittle seems strange to us and repulsive and unhygienic. But in the ancient world, it was quite common. Spittle, and especially the spittle of some distinguished person, was believed to possess some curative qualities. So it seems like the basic point here is the disciples talked about it, and Jesus, with great love and compassion, did something about it. He got his hands dirty. He helped this man. But I think there may be more to the story here, since it seems as though Jesus would heal in different ways, with different methods, with varying degrees of faith on the part of the person healed or on the part of his friends or no one at all except Jesus himself. Why? I think so that we would understand that healing is a sovereign act of God. It's not a formula. It's not something that we can conjure up by doing things a certain way. And I'm thankful for that, because if Jesus were to have always healed as he did in what we read today, can you imagine what we would have to do after every church service? Yuck! Anyway, thankfully, verse 7, he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. I love the simplicity of the scene. Jesus sees a beggar born blind. He's moved with compassion. He anoints his eyes with clay and tells him to go and wash it off in the pool of Siloam. So he went, he washed, and he came back seeing. Now, just imagine the journey to and from the pool of Siloam. Bumbling, stumbling, itchy, irritating, mud in your eye, and yet he was courageously obedient, and he came back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors and those who had previously seen that he was blind said, is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. He said, I am he. Funny. Once again, the people were talking about him right in front of him like he was deaf, not blind. So they said to him, how are your eyes open? And he answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went, I washed, and I received sight." Then they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Oh man, why did they have to bring him to the Pharisees? I mean, you know that the blind Pharisees are only going to notice the fact that Jesus made clay on the Sabbath. And they are going to be completely blind to the fact that this beggar born blind can now see. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, I washed, and I see." Therefore some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was division among them. And they said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him because he opened your eyes?" He said, "He's a prophet." But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. You see, the Pharisees were truly the blind ones, because they refused to believe that Jesus did this because he was good and because he was God. They were willingly ignorant. They chose rather to believe that this was all a hoax, so they call in the parents of the beggar born blind. And they ask them, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? Then how does he now see?" And his parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we don't know. He's of age, ask him. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He's of age, ask him." Now, in this day and age, it would have been insanely radical and dangerous to go toe-to-toe with the Pharisees. So the common people watching this had to have had their jaws on the floor, wondering what was going to happen next. See, if you crossed the Pharisees in any way, you risked the chance of being put out of the synagogue. You risked the chance of being excommunicated from Jewish life. You would not only lose your ability to worship, but you would lose your business, your livelihood, your ability to provide for your family, your friends, your everything. That was the cost of taking on the Pharisees. So they again called the man who was blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." It seems like the beggar born blind isn't intimidated. I wonder why. Oh, I know. Because he can see now. "One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." Isn't that great? The holy boldness that comes from being healed by Jesus. Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become one of his disciples?" "Bring it on, blind man," or rather, formerly blind man. Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciples, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we don't know where he's from." The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins, and you're teaching us?" And they cast him out. The Pharisees have had enough of logic and reason, so they've resorted to name-calling once again, basically saying, "You're stupid. You're completely born in sins, and you're teaching us?" And they cast him out. This is so tragic. These are the ones that were charged with the responsibility of caring and cultivating God's people. And they were so spiritually blind and so insecure. All of these outbursts are from pride, the total unwillingness to admit that they could ever be wrong about anything. Whenever anyone got remotely close to painting them in a corner with logic and reason, they exploded with rage and personal attack and simply sought to remove from their lives anyone that would say anything about them doing anything wrong. What is so hard with just saying, "Yup, you're right, I'm wrong"? I just don't understand that. Or maybe I do. I think we've all been Pharisees once or twice, or 3 times, or 4 times, or a multitude of times. Someone speaking the truth to us, and in order to receive that truth, we have to, horror of horrors, admit that we were wrong. But instead of humbling ourselves and doing that, we just turn up the volume and try to reinforce our ignorant argument, to reinforce our position with bitterness and name-calling, saying things like, "You were completely born in sins, and you're teaching us? Who are you to say?" And they cast him out. They cast him out of their lives. They cast him out of temple worship. They just excommunicated him from their life. And I wonder if now, walking away, he had second thoughts about taking his stand against the Pharisees. I wonder. Now in verse 35 it says, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" Isn't our Jesus awesome? He heard that they had cast him out, and so he sought him out. That's my Jesus. He seeks out the ones that the world throws away. When Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And he answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." And then he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. And now the picture is complete. Jesus saw a beggar born blind. He had compassion on him and did something to cure him. He aggravated the area of pain and then commanded him to go and wash it off. The beggar born blind was obedient to the compassionate command of Jesus, and in obedience, he humbled himself and humiliated himself on the way down to wash off the dirt. He was thinking, I don't care what anyone thinks. Jesus commanded me to do this. And he came back seeing. What a great image of the gospel. What a great image of baptism. And after he received his sight, he begins to realize who it was that healed him. In verse 11, he called Jesus a man. In verse 17, he called Jesus a prophet. And in verse 38, after Jesus sought him out once again, he realizes that Jesus is the Son of God, and he believes and he worships him.